This is my third video on punctuation. In this video, I will be talking about colons and semicolons. Just to show you the difference between them visually, on the left-hand side I have a colon, so you can see that a colon is 2 dots. And on the right-hand side, I have a semicolon. So as you can see, a semicolon has a dot on the top and then a comma on the bottom, really. So a colon is 2 dots, and then a semicolon is a dot on the top with a comma on the bottom. When I tell you about how to use colons, I will be talking about writing units of time, business letter salutations, making lists, and doing something called offering explanations, or at least that's what I'm calling it. When I share the examples, you will understand what I mean. Then when I tell you about semicolons, I will be talking about probably the most common use to start off with would be that instead of saying something with the word but in it, right, a comma, but you could put a semicolon there. The second thing I will talk about is how you can use a semicolon instead of having a comma and a coordinating conjunction. So actually, what you see here with comma but, that's a comma with a coordinating conjunction. So that's just one coordinating conjunction. That word but is just one coordinating conjunction that you use. And the thing is that not all of the coordinating conjunctions will work. It doesn't work all the time. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time explaining that to you today. And then the third thing, I want to show you how you can use a semicolon with a comma and a transitional expression. So these are just different ways that you can form a sentence. So when we start getting into semicolons, you get fancier sentences. So number 4 here, another fancier kind of sentence that you could have is with more complicated lists and something called elliptical constructions. Don't let that frighten you. I will share examples and it should be all right. And with all of this said, if there's any examples that I'm showing you and you don't feel ready to do that in your own writing, don't worry about it. Remember, I want to share this video series so that it could reach everybody, right? If you were to watch this from the beginning to the end, you might learn some things that you already know. You might learn some new things, and I'm just doing my best to share the information that I feel is important. So just before I continue, this is what you've already learned about. You've already learned about periods, question marks, exclamation marks, quotation marks, apostrophes, and commas. Alright, talking about colons, and the first thing to do with colons is talking about writing units of time. So I just have some examples here. First one, class starts at 9 a.m. and it ends at 9:55 a.m. And on the right-hand side, you see I've written it out in words. I've written the times out in words for anybody that can only read the notes and can't access the video. So 9 a.m., right, it would be written 9 a.m. and 9:55 a.m. would be spoken out 9:55 a.m. Next one, she ran the 10-mile road race in 2 hours, 39 minutes. So that's how you would say this number. You'd say 2 hours, 39 minutes. Right. Next sentence, the fastest runner had a time of 50 minutes, 54 seconds. And the last example with units of time. The boys' qualifying time at the swim meet was 29.45 seconds. So that's how you say this number, right? You can see that there's a point there, a dot there. You'd say 29.45 seconds. So that's how you would say that. Alright, next set of examples. You would also use a colon if you're writing a business letter and you have what's called a salutation. Let's say you don't know the person's name, but you need to write a letter to a business for some reason, but you don't know who is going to end up reading the letter. So you could start it off with, "To whom it may concern." Right? So you can see here with all of these examples, there are colons at the end. So very important to remember that when you write a business letter, you always have a colon at the end of the salutation, and that salutation is a really important part of a business letter. All right, so if we look at the other ones, right, "Dear Ms. Capri," that word Ms, you'd use Ms for a female who may or may not be married with a new name. So if you're writing a letter to a woman and you're not sure if she's married, and you're not sure if she took her married name or if she kept her maiden name, then you could address her as Ms. "Dear Mr. Zappa," Mr. is obvious, that would be any male receiving the letter. "Dear Miss Glowry," so you would use Miss for a young unmarried female. Last example, "Dear Mrs. Springer," use Mrs. for a married female when you know her last name. Right? I mean, if you're not sure, if a woman is married and if she's changed her name or not. I know myself, I'm married, but I never changed my name. So if people are referring to me, then I would want them to call me Ms. Cole. All right. Next example, talking about how you would use colons when making lists. Let me read through these examples. Example A. If you would like to train in swimming, then you need to know... Sorry, let me start again. If you would like to train in swimming, then you will need the following equipment: a swimsuit, goggles, a cap, a board, fins, a pull buoy paddles, a band, and a snorkel. So you can see that I've introduced this list of things. And when I say introduced, one of the common words that you'll see if people introduce lists is this word following, or the following. So notice these words here: if you would like to train in swimming, then you will need the following equipment. If I were to take out the words "the following" and the words "then you will need the following equipment," then I could just write it out without a colon. I could say, if you would like to train in swimming, then please bring a swimsuit, goggles, a cap, a board, right? Then I wouldn't need a colon, but because I've got these words here, then you will need the following things. Because I'm saying that, I need to have a colon there. Next example. Here is how to play a game called Freeze Dance. Okay, so you notice how the title of the name is inside of quotation marks, and I could have written that in italics if I wanted to, but I used quotation marks instead. Here is how to play a game called Freeze Dance, colon, right? Notice how there's a colon there? I've introduced my instructions that way, right? Number 1, choose one person to play the music. 2, when the music starts, everyone dances. 3, when the music stops, everyone freezes in their position. 4, anyone caught moving is out. 5, continue playing until there is only one person left. So you notice that there's 2 ways to write a list, really. You can write it out just all on one line or a couple of lines, like with example A. Or you can list each part of the list out, like I've done here with example B. When would this be useful? Well, the best example I can think of is if you're sharing instructions. Maybe it's a memo or maybe a letter. This isn't a formal sentence, but I think you get the idea, right? If you were sending a letter to someone that you worked with and you were trying to explain something to them and you were trying to give them the steps to follow, then it would be easier to read it like this. Example C. There are 3 ways to figure out the answer. Find it on the internet, read it in your book, or ask the teacher for help. Example D. He always brings a certain number of items when he travels. See that colon there after travels? An extra set of clothes, several healthy snacks, a pillow, and his iPad. Next way of using colons is when offering explanations. Let me just read through the first examples to start off with. Number 1, when it snows like this, there is only one thing to do. Stay home and relax. Let me read out the second one, and then maybe I'll try to say what I can hopefully explain to you. My teacher was right. The test wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be. Okay, so when I'm talking about an explanation, it's sort of like imagining a situation, and maybe you're thinking about it, maybe something's happening, maybe something has already happened, and you're trying to explain maybe your feelings or your plans, or what is going on, right? With number 1, right, the situation is that maybe there was a big snowfall, and you use this colon to tell people what they should do because of it, right? In number 2, maybe you were nervous to write a test, right? And then you think back, so then you write the test and everything's okay, and then you think, oh, I need to let people know that my teacher was right, and here is why, right? The test wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be. All right, so in this case here, right, when it snows like this, there's only one thing to do, and I'll tell you what it is, right? Stay home and relax. My teacher was right, and here is why. The test wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be. So you can see that a colon sort of allows you to say what you're trying to say and use less words to say it. It's another way of explaining it. Okay, example 3. The family pets don't get along. The dog is always eating the cat food, so the cat chases the dog and scratches its face. So if we look at where our colon is, right, the family pets don't get along, I could get rid of that and I could start a new sentence. And I could say something like, this is because, right? So I'm explaining why they don't get along. But I can put everything into one sentence when I have this colon there. Number 4. Mary is probably waiting inside. It has been raining all day. Right, so see where this colon is, right? Mary has probably been waiting inside, colon, or in other words, the reason why she's been inside is because it has been raining all day, right? So Mary is probably waiting inside. It has been raining all day. Last one. 2 weeks of holidays, time with friends and family. This will be a nice break. Let me say it again, and I'll tell you where the colon is. 2 weeks of holidays, time with friends and family, colon. This will be a nice break. Okay. I thought that this was a neat little example. All right, so you're kind of doing the opposite there, right? You're saying a couple of things, and then you're explaining why you just said them. Semicolons are equally as fun as colons. All right, so the first way of using a semicolon, and remember that the semicolon is different than the colon, right? The semicolon has the dot on the top and the comma on the bottom there. All right, so you can use semicolons instead of a comma, but. Okay, let me just go through these examples for that here. Example A. The phone rang. Nobody answered it. So you could start off with 2 separate sentences. And then using comma but, you could put those sentences together to make one sentence. The phone rang, comma, but nobody answered it. Then, instead of having comma but, another option would be just to put the semicolon in. The phone rang, semicolon, nobody answered it. So you would say it like this. You'd say, the phone rang, nobody answered it. So it sounds like you have a period, but you don't. You have a semicolon. And you have a semicolon instead of this comma but. Right? And just so that you know, whether you have two separate sentences, comma but, or a semicolon, all three ways of explaining the situation are correct. Example B. Okay, one sentence, the cat needs food. Next sentence, the dog keeps eating it. We could put that together with comma but. The cat needs food, comma, but the dog keeps eating it. Or we could put a semicolon in instead of that comma but. We could say, the cat needs food, semicolon, the dog keeps eating it. The cat needs food, the dog keeps eating it. Last example with this comma but being replaced by a semicolon. You could have one sentence, two sentences. The first sentence could be, she tried to fix the car herself. Next sentence, her brother had to help her. Or you could combine them with comma but. You could say, she tried to fix the car herself, comma, but her brother had to help her. Or instead of that comma but, you could put in a semicolon. She tried to fix the car herself, semicolon, her brother had to help her. She tried to fix the car herself, her brother had to help her. Alright, so another way to use a semicolon, alright, would be to use it instead of a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Now, there's a way of remembering all of the coordinating conjunctions, and earlier in this video series I also talked about conjunctions, because coordinating conjunctions are just one type of conjunction, but they're very important. So on the right-hand side, right, you can see, right, for, and, nor. I'll just skip ahead. But, or, yet, so. So we have our fanboys. Okay, so that's an acronym that helps you remember the coordinating conjunctions. Alright, now, something that I noted at the very beginning of this video is that not all of the coordinating conjunctions work, because in order to use a semicolon, the thoughts need to be related. So anything that I've got in yellow, right, nor, or, so, the thoughts aren't related in the way that they need to be related in order to use a semicolon. And let me just go through these examples to explain. So if we look at an example with this conjunction for, alright, so I'll start off with having that comma and that conjunction, okay. He followed her, comma, for she was going to give him a tour of the building. He followed her, for she was going to give him a tour of the building. So instead of having comma for, we could say, he followed her, semicolon, she was going to give him a tour of the building. So in this case, the thoughts are related in the way that they need to be related. You know, he follows her for a certain reason, and so that works really well. So we can put a semicolon in there. Example 2. She crossed the hall and he wondered where she was going. So you notice here we have the conjunction and, right? And you always put a comma, right, in front of a coordinating conjunction. Notice how there's a comma before and. So instead of saying she crossed the hall and he wondered where she was going, we could say she crossed the hall, he wondered where she was going, and you notice that there's a semicolon after hall. Right? So it's sort of like, you know, two things are happening at the same time, and they're very much related, because at the same time as she's crossing the hall, he's wondering about that. Okay, so that's why in this case the semicolon works very well. Now here's an example of a conjunction that would not work, where you could not put a semicolon in. And this is the conjunction nor. All right. Now, when you use nor in a sentence, it's pretty special, because you have to use it with the word neither, or you could pronounce it neither. I think I'll pronounce it neither. He neither followed her, nor did he care where she went. So if you're using nor, you always have to start off with neither. He neither followed her, comma, nor did he care where she went. And you can't put a semicolon in the place of nor, because you have to start with neither, and it just doesn't work. All right. So just remember that that if you have the conjunction nor, that you can't replace it with a semicolon. All right. Number 4. We're looking at this coordinating conjunction but. I know I shared a whole bunch of examples already using but here's one more. She crossed the hall, but he did not follow her. We could change that to she crossed the hall, he did not follow her. Right? So we go from she crossed the hall, comma, but he did not follow her, to she crossed the hall, semicolon, he did not follow her. All right, number 5, we're looking at the coordinating conjunction or. And the thing with or is that it provides 2 different options. So that should be a big hint there. If it's 2 different things, if we're talking about doing 2 different things, then the semicolon isn't going to work with it, because as I've explained before, the thoughts have to be related in the way that we need them to be related. So maybe a couple of things that are happening together that aren't sort of, here's one action and then a whole separate action, right? It could be 2 actions that could happen together, but here we have 2 options that can't happen together. Let me read this example. You can follow me, or you can stay where you are. Right? So either, the person goes one way or another way. It's not sort of like the person is doing something and then at the same time they could do something else. It's either one or the other. So that's why the semicolon would not work. We would say that the ideas are not related. Okay, next example with the conjunction yet. He wondered where she was going, yet he was afraid to ask. So at the same time that he's wondering, he's afraid. Okay? And because of that, we can use a semicolon. He wondered where she was going. He was afraid to ask. He wondered where she was going, semicolon. He was afraid to ask. All right. Last one is with this coordinating conjunction, so. He wondered where she was going, comma, so he asked her. Okay, now, this would not work with a semicolon, because wondering where she is going and asking about it are 2 different things, right? And when I say that, I mean that you think of it this way. At first he's wondering, and then he goes and asks her, right? Instead of something like he wondered where she was going, he thought of asking her, right? So if he's wondering and then thinking and that's sort of you're thinking of the same thing at the same time, then that would be related, right? But here, this action of wondering and then this action of actually asking, they're 2 different things. So you could not use a semicolon with them. All right. using a semicolon with a comma and a transitional expression. This might sound fancy, but really it's not. Let me just show you how I've typed all of the transitions in red, all right? And what I want you to notice is that there's a semicolon and then a transition and then a comma every time. So I say something, semicolon, transition, comma. Say something else, semicolon, transition, comma. Say something else, semicolon, transition, comma. Say another thing, semicolon, transition, comma. Say something else, semicolon, transition, comma. Okay? And then another example, I say something else, semicolon, transition, comma. So it's actually pretty easy to make this happen, and you know, you just make a fancier sentence, really. And of course, this list of sentences does not include all of the possibilities. I'd be here for a while if I was trying to do that. There's so many possibilities in the English language. All right, let me just go ahead and read through these. And what I will do is I will say the punctuation out loud so that you can hear it and you can see it. Number 1, most of the teaching staff was in a meeting all morning, semicolon. Consequently, comma, no work was marked until the afternoon. Example 2, the snow should be cleared off the car, semicolon. Otherwise, comma, driving will be dangerous. Actually, let me read a few without saying the punctuation out loud. 3, we should leave the party early to avoid driving in the dark. Besides, we will see everyone again at the golf tournament this weekend. Number 4, the child only swam independently for a few seconds. Nevertheless, the parents were thrilled. So you can see when I don't say the punctuation out loud, you can hear how nice that sounds, right? So we can create some very nice sentences. Okay, with these last two, I'll read them out twice. Number 5, Gail's best friend moved away 10 years ago, semicolon. However, comma, the two of them are now friends on Facebook. Gail's best friend moved away 10 years ago. However, the two of them are now friends on Facebook. Last one. The extremely cold weather makes exercising outside impossible, semicolon. Instead, comma, I will go to the gym. The extremely cold weather makes exercising outside impossible. Instead, I will go to the gym. All right. Last slide here. We're talking about semicolons with more complicated lists and something called elliptical expressions. All right. Actually, this is I've taken a few slides to explain this. So let's talk about more complicated lists first. All right. So when we have a more complicated list, we have a scenario where we might already have commas that are part of the list. Let me just read this out, then I'll explain a little bit more. Number 1, there are several good things about living in a small town. Life moves more slowly and you don't feel rushed. Most of the activities are within walking distance, so you get more exercise. There is always someone to say hello to, and everyone looks out for each other. And that's all in one sentence. All right, so that's what I mean by a complicated list. I just mean that you can say a lot more by using punctuation to help you do that. Some things to point out here. All right, I'll just sort of read out sections. There are several good things about living in a small town. So I've just introduced the fact that I'm going to share several things that I enjoy. And you can see that there's a colon there. All right. So you could do this with anything. You could tell me a whole bunch of things about one topic. You just explain what your topic is, and then you list them off, right? And then just in between each thing, right, you would put a semicolon. So here, life moves more slowly, comma, and you don't feel rushed, semicolon. Okay, that's like saying, this is my first thing that I'm listing, right? And then I keep going. Most of the activities are within walking distance, comma, so you get more exercise, semicolon. And then I keep going. There is always someone to say hello to, right? Semicolon. And then I finish it off. And everyone looks out for each other. There are several good things about living in a small town. Life moves more slowly and you don't feel rushed. Most of the activities are within walking distance, so you get more exercise. There is always someone to say hello to, and everyone looks out for each other. Okay. So we have to use semicolons when we already have commas as part of the list. Here's I think a little bit of an easier one, maybe. I don't know, depends on your opinion. Number 2, I'll just read it. 3 new staff members have been hired at the school. Heather Burt, counselor, Dawn Torek, teacher, and Vivian Ernest, librarian. Okay, so I made up some names. I had fun with that. Okay, so again here, semicolons are needed because there are already commas as part of the list. And when I say that, I mean we have the person's name and their job, right? Heather Burt, comma, counselor, right? Dawn Torek, comma, teacher. Vivian Ernest, comma, librarian, right? And you should see a pattern here. We have the name, then a comma, then their job title, and then a semicolon. So let me read this out again, and I'll talk about the punctuation, and I'll mention the punctuation while I'm reading. 3 new staff members have been hired at the school, colon. Heather Burt, comma, counselor, semicolon. Dawn Torek, comma, teacher, semicolon. And Vivian Ernest, comma, librarian, period. Always put a period at the end of the sentence. All right, so you could share different names and different jobs, or different names and different roles. You could even share a location with something to do at that location, or something to do at a certain location even. Right? You could use this idea in a few different ways. Number 3, this year we should plan to go hunting in the fall, skiing, snowmobiling, and fishing in the winter, hiking, jogging, and biking in the spring, and then when the lake is warm in the summer, we can go swimming. All right, let me read it again. I'll read it a little bit slower. This year, we should plan to go hunting in the fall, skiing, snowmobiling, and fishing in the winter, hiking, jogging, and biking in the spring, and then when the lake is warm in the summer, we can go swimming. Right? I can tell you this, if you wrote a sentence like that, I would be pretty impressed. It actually took me a while to think of this sentence. So really, what I'm telling you here, I'm imagining that I'm a person who's sharing some information, and I'm trying to explain what I think we should do at different times of the year, right? And you notice with each time of the year it gets separated by a semicolon. So I talk about hunting in the fall, and then I talk about, right, notice how there's a semicolon after fall. And then I talk about skiing, snowmobiling, and fishing in the winter. Notice how there's a semicolon after winter. And then I talk about hiking, jogging, and biking in the spring. And you notice that there's a semicolon after spring. And then, of course, I just finish it off, right? So I've got, and then the lake is warm and then when the lake is warm in the summer, we can go swimming. All right, so here too we have commas that are part of the items in the list, except it's a little bit more complicated because in the list is sort of what we should do for each time of year. Notice how the semicolons separate the items, right? So the stuff to do in the fall versus the stuff to do in the winter versus the stuff to do in the spring, and then the stuff to do in the summer. All right, so of course, as I said, activities are mentioned for each season: fall, winter, spring, and summer. All right. So, number 4, this is the last slide. We're talking about semicolons with more complicated lists and elliptical expressions, right? And so right now, I am talking about elliptical expressions. So when you have elliptical expressions, that means that you use semicolons and commas to avoid repetition. Right? This is pretty fancy stuff, but bear with me here. I'll do my best to explain it. We'll do one example at a time. Example 1. For 2 months, we saw a lot of snow. Suddenly, all slush. Let me read it again with I'll say the punctuation out loud. For 2 months, comma, we saw a lot of snow, semicolon. Suddenly, comma, all slush. And that's all in one sentence. All right, so that part that comes before the semicolon has some words in it that could be repeated. All right, so another way to say this, we could say, for 2 months we saw a lot of snow, comma, but suddenly, comma, we saw all slush. So I don't know if you heard me say the words we saw twice in there, right? We saw a lot of snow, we saw us all slush. So pretty much what I'm doing is I'm getting rid of the words we saw, and the combination of the semicolon and comma makes this possible. All right, so let's look at this one more time. For 2 months, comma, we saw a lot of snow, semicolon. Suddenly, comma, all slush. So see where this comma is after suddenly, right? That comma is being used instead of using the words we saw. Okay, so we avoid repeating the words we saw by using a comma instead. But just remember that we need to have this combination of a few words said and then a semicolon, and then we say something else. We sort of start what we're saying, and then we put a comma where the words would be, right? Where the words, in this case, we saw, would be. All right. Well, let's do another one. I think my third example is the best. So, because we're not really getting rid of a lot of words, right? Just a few. All right. Number 2, we will get to go to parties all weekend. On Monday, back to work. Right? So you can see here, we will get to go to parties all weekend, semicolon. So that's the first thing that I say, right? And then I say, on Monday, back to work. So what's happening here is I got rid of the words we will get to go, right? I mean, another way that we could say this is we could say, we will get to go to parties all weekend, but on Monday, we will get to go back to work, right? But the way that I have it here, we will get to go to parties all weekend, on Monday, back to work. Because we've got this comma here, right, that's used instead of the words we will get to go, we have a shorter sentence, and that sounds, I mean, I think it sounds better. And I mean, this is your choice, right? If you don't want to make a sentence like this, you don't have to. I'm just showing you what's possible. And again, the combination of the semicolon and the comma is what you need, right? We will get to go to the parties all weekend, semicolon, on Monday, comma, back to work. Number 3. Last one. Today I am planning to go for a walk, read a book, and drink tea. Tomorrow, nothing. Okay, so you can imagine here, right? I used quite a few words. I said, I am planning to, right? Right. So the part that comes before the semicolon, right, has words, right? I am planning to do what, right? Now, I could use all the words for both sides of the sentence. I could say, today I am planning to go for a walk, read a book, and drink tea, period. And then I'd actually have to start a new sentence, right? Tomorrow, comma, I am planning to do nothing. So in this case, we actually have a scenario where instead of having to write 2 separate sentences, we can put it all into one sentence. So it really can be useful to understand how to do this. Now, some of you might be saying, well, why can't I put it all in one sentence? Well, because see how we have all these commas here, right? Today I'm planning to go for a walk, comma, read a book, and drink tea. Well, as soon as you start having commas, and not only that, but there's a whole bunch of things that you're planning to do, right? You really should, if you decide to talk about what you're doing tomorrow, if you don't have this semicolon happening, right? Then you really should start a new sentence, right? So today I am planning to go for a walk, read a book, and drink tea. Period. Tomorrow I am planning to do nothing. But here I was able to use a semicolon and a comma to put everything into one sentence. Today I am planning to go for a walk, read a book, and drink tea. Tomorrow, nothing. Right? So I hope that this video was helpful, and I look forward to the next one.